Good morning again. Nice to see you all after our very lengthy 10 o'clock committee meeting. I will convene this public hearing of the Finance, Revenue and Bonding Committee. And even though this isn't on the agenda, if either of the ranking members have any opening remarks they'd like to share with us today? No, if not, we will get started and welcome our first I always want to say witness. You're not a witness. We're not swearing you in. To Sarah Ganong. Welcome.
Awesome. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for having this hearing today and glad to be kicking us all off. My name is Sarah Ganong. I'm from here in Hartford. I'm the state director of Connecticut Working Families Power, and we're a proud member of the Connecticut for All Coalition. Thanks for the chance to testify today in support of SB 1528, an act concerning a study of state taxation, as well as taking the opportunity to speak briefly about the need for a bold finance and tax package out of this committee. Overall, our organizations support the concept behind 1528 to study certain Connecticut taxes imposed in relation to nearby states. We'd like to propose, however, expanding the reasons for that study. Connecticut faces unprecedented challenges, from rising food prices to incoming attacks from the administration in Washington. And it's become even clearer that, unfortunately, our inequitable tax structure is leaving working people behind. We thus propose expanding the purpose of this study to outlined in the bill to include study of how our tax structure can more effectively fund services and reduce inequality in our state. While economic competitiveness is important, we deem reducing economic inequality worth studying as well. Thanks for considering this friendly addition to the bill before you today. Additionally, Connecticut for All would like to take advantage of the analysis of state taxes presented here to speak a little bit more broadly in favor of a bold and transformative tax package. Myself, as well as a few others from our coalition, will be testifying in this manner today, and just thanks for the opportunity to do so. We know that ignoring the looming impact of Donald Trump and Elon Musk's gutting of the federal government and decimation of federal support for states would be a critical mistake. Your committee, in addition to supporting forward-thinking bills like 1528, has a tremendous opportunity as you shape the legislature's budget package. The Trump-Musk alliance threatens democracy, workers' rights, and public services, but Connecticut can lead the charge to safeguard our future. Our budget could close the carried interest loophole, expand taxes on capital gains of our wealthiest residents, and follow the lead of Massachusetts in increasing the income tax in the top tier of earners. We could implement the mansion tax, as discussed in a recent public hearing, or raise corporate tax rates and close loopholes for corporations based elsewhere that do the bulk of their business here in Connecticut. And I'm sure there's even more creative ideas that I haven't mentioned that have been proposed by this committee and proposed in front of this committee during session. And I believe and hope that you're considering all of them in this moment right now. At a time when the Trump tax cuts are going to let millionaires and billionaires off the hook, Connecticut has a real chance to divert some of that revenue out of the pockets of the wealthy and back into our budget and services. Thanks again for the chance to testify a little more broadly today, in addition to supporting the concept behind SB 1528. We should study taxes, and Connecticut for All supports the bill with an expanded focus. And the legislature has the power to act further by modifying our fiscal roadblocks, implementing progressive taxation, and making the investments working families deserve. Thanks for your time and your hard work, which I know is going to be continuing, and on the entire tax package that is going to be put forth, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you. And thank you for starting us off with the big picture. Representative Menapace.
Good morning, sir. I just had a quick question, because you always talked about the need to adjust the fiscal guardrails for the revenue portion, but I was wondering if you all have any particular area you mentioned a lot of different ideas for these ones, of one that you think would essentially generate the most revenue for the state.
Yeah, I think it's going to be really important to look at the ways, particularly with income taxes, that we can think about some of the revenue that's sort of the wealthiest in our state are going to be no longer paying to the federal government, on the assumption that the Trump's tax cuts will be renewed. And like I said, diverting some of that out of those folks' pockets and into state coffers instead. I think there's a big amount there, and a lot of those folks are going to sort of be getting a break from the federal government. So the coalition would propose being able to divert some of that money into the state.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Again, thank you for your work, and thank you for kicking us off. Next up, we have Stephen Medancy, and please correct my pronunciation of your name if I'm wrong.
No, you are correct. Nice job. So I apologize I'm not able to make it in person and testify today, but I wanted to speak on the all-important bill, House Bill 7239. Chairpersons Fonfera, Horn, ranking members Fazio and Paletta, and distinguished members of the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Steve Medancy, and I'm honored to serve as the superintendent of the Southington Public Schools. As educators, our focus is always on student achievement, but we know learning doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's deeply impacted by the environment that the students learn in. When classrooms are too hot, too cold, when lighting is poor, when spaces are outdated or in disrepair, it affects focus, engagement, and the overall well-being of our students and staff. In Southington, we work hard to meet those expectations with the resources we have, but we also know school maintenance is often one of the first areas impacted by budget cuts. Minor repairs, renovations, and upgrades, while critical, frequently compete with other urgent needs and are often deferred. A couple examples of Southington-specific projects. Over the past 3 years, the district has spent $123,000, $412 on roof repairs alone. These roofs have consistently been postponed on the capital improvement plan due to the town's debt service when considered along with our town and Board of Ed annual operating expenses. Next year, we're shifting to a middle school schedule that necessitates retrofitting a couple general classrooms to science classrooms. That's a $33,000 cost. An additional $121,000 is needed to replace a boiler at one of our high schools, or one of our boilers at our high school. We have a large high school. And then lastly, just a couple other examples, our acoustic panels in the music room, which are original to 1974. We need to replace at a cost of $41,000. And catch basins, walkways need repair or replacing, again, at a cost of $55,000. If this bill were to be supported, Southington would receive about $265,000 in dedicated funding. And as I just shared with you, all of those dollars could go a long way towards, some of the structural maintenance repairs that we have to undergo. But more importantly, I think the dollars that would be diverted then, that we would be saving as a community due to the state aid, would be going directly towards students and programs and services, which would ultimately, improve academic outcomes, which is, I think, the goal that we all would want for our students and our communities. Thank you.
Thank you. And any questions for Mr. Venanzi? Seeing none, thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Stephen Ryu from Putnam Public Schools.
Hi, good morning. I really like the French pronunciation of that. Appreciate that. Thank you. I tell my students it's Steve Rio, like Rio de Janeiro.
Okay.
I'd like to thank you for the
I
time
was
and
so
opportunity.
confident I was getting that one right.
Thank you so much. So once again, Steve Rio, Superintendent of Putnam Public Schools. I know you have a long list of testimony today, so I'd like to try to share a different perspective. I'm in support of House Bill 7239, just like my former colleague. When we're managing a public school district budget, it's nearly impossible to think about a school budget's increase that is not at least 3%. And for many of our distressed municipalities, when the ECS funding helps supports our school district's budget, and if that's 50% of our overall budget, whenever a school district increases its overall budget, let's say 3%, that means the taxpayer has to absorb 6% of an increase, because the overall school budget is increasing by 3%. That means the local community is only using 50% of the tax base to make up that 3%. So the impact on the taxpayer is actually 6%. Putnam has not received a 3% increase from its community, with the exception of once after the fiscal gold cliff from COVID in the last 12 years. So what ends up happening is a lot of these smaller projects that we need to do end up getting cut on a frequent basis. This funding is fundamental in supporting us to make smart decisions and give us an opportunity to plan for some of those things. I'm sure you'll hear lots of examples. Our parking lots are starting to fall apart. Crack filling is $36,000. In my budget this year, we had to cut staff. So that project obviously is going to get cut. To fund some of these projects that get cut every year, year after year after year, we tend to use the end of the year funding to help support some of these small facility projects. If you're a school district like ours is upside down this year because of special education costs, those smaller projects are not going to get done. And I think the other thing that's really exciting about this proposal is to be able to cross fiscal years. When we're trying to do those end of the year projects, one of the things we have to be concerned about are the materials on back order. Can we actually do it within the fiscal year, which is only a short window? So overall, I think the DRIP program provides a unique opportunity, just like LoCIP. But I think it's actually it's really more important for school districts because of our constraints within the fiscal year. So once again, I'd like to thank you for your time and open to any questions.
Thank you. I'll ask one question that I may ask repeatedly today, but basically, short of the state's, school construction funding, full-on school construction funding, are there any other revenue sources available to you for these sorts of smaller scale projects that you've just laid out?
It's really just grants, right? The ability for the non-lapsing account is one source that some districts will use for some of this funding, but the reality is we try to protect that funding. Putnam's a small budget of about $20 million. We're upside down this year, $500,000. I'm going to be hitting that. So to use that funding stream, other than that, we try to use little grants from here and there. So this program would be critical in helping us make smart decisions. Because if we knew the funding was coming and we knew we could lapse it just like LoCIP from one year to another, we could make some strategic plans that are going to help spend the taxpayers' dollars more efficiently.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions, thanks for sharing your perspective with us.
Thank you for the time.
Next up, we have Laurel Steinhauser.
Good morning, Chairpersons Fanfara and Horn, Ranking Members Fazio and Paletta, and distinguished members of the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee. Thank you for the opportunity to submit testimony in support of HB 7239, an act establishing a public school district repair and improvement project program. My name is Laurel Steinhauser, and I have the honor and privilege of serving as chairperson of the Portland Board of Education. Like most districts across Connecticut, our Board of Ed and district leaders are constantly working to address necessary building maintenance within the constraints of our financial resources and the unpredictability that exists within education budgets. With no dedicated source of state funds, costs of minor capital repairs and improvements to our aging schools, along with routine maintenance, fall entirely on our local taxpayers. Every year during our municipal budget process, I watch our Board of Selectmen struggle to balance our many community needs with what local taxpayers are able to shoulder. And as I am sure is the case in many communities, funding for capital projects is the first thing cut, deferring necessary repairs and creating situations where small needs eventually turn into much bigger needs. While the Portland Board of Education maintains a dedicated maintenance fund to support our facilities, the reality is that fund depends on having end-of-year savings to put away for future emergencies. In each of the last 2 years, hundreds of thousands of dollars in unanticipated special education costs left us in a hard freeze, and we finished each year with nothing to invest in long-term maintenance. The proposed DRIP program in HB 7239 is a practical solution for a challenge that has consistently plagued districts and communities. The new program would provide a dedicated, predictable funding source for minor but essential repairs and offer school districts the resources needed to proactively maintain their facilities so students and educators can learn and work in safe, healthy environments. Much as I have seen my community benefit from LoCIP funds, making possible sidewalk improvements downtown, parking lot improvements at our fire stations and town hall, and safety improvements at our town parks, to name a few, DRIP funds could fix broken bathroom partitions, repair leaking pipes and cracked tiles, or replace the 37-year-old boiler that failed in our intermediate school 2 weeks ago. I urge the committee to support HB 7239 and help districts like Portland sustain the facilities our students and staff depend on. Thank you for your time, consideration, and support of this critical initiative.
And thank you for being with us. Seeing no further questions, I wish you a very good day. Next up, we have Elaine Maynard Adams.
Good morning, members of the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee. I'm Elaine Maynard Adams, and I'm the chairwoman of the New London Board of Education. I'm addressing you today to urge your support for House Bill 7239. This is the bill that establishes a LoCIP-like program to assist local school districts with the cost of capital repairs. New London is very fortunate in that over the last 20 years, all of our schools have been built. either built as new or have had significant updating and upgrading. Our Multi-Magnet High School campus project was finished just a year ago. Our middle school project completed this fall. Keeping our buildings in proper condition is a priority for our Board of Education. Each year we prepare a capital improvements plan that we then share with the city. Some projects are large enough to be part of a larger city bonding package. The smaller projects, not so much. And for those, we look to pay for them from our local budget. But each year, the availability of local funds for these smaller projects shrinks. The upcoming fiscal year will not provide any relief either. As I address you today, our budget is about $8 million in the hole. Faced with the choice of paying for building repairs or keeping a teacher in a classroom, I can assure you that the board will vote to keep the teacher every single time. I think we can all agree that repeated deferment of maintenance and repairs eventually results in a much larger cost. But these are the real world choices that boards of education make every day when faced with insufficient funding to meet the needs of our students, our families, and our staff. As an example, you may be aware that Section 44 of Public Act 23-167 requires local boards of education to perform air quality testing every 5 years and to report the results of this testing to the state. We've just completed this required testing in one of our schools, and we're now struggling with how to cover the cost of addressing the recommendations contained in the report. The testing requirement itself is a great example of the kinds of unfunded mandates that, while well-intentioned, do not provide any cost assistance. Repairing, replacing, or remediating air handling equipment is one potential use of DRIP funds. And just as the City of New London has made very good use of its LoCIP funds over the years, the Board of Education will make good use of its DRIP funds to ensure a clean, safe, and sound environment for our children. I urge your support of this important effort to help keep our schools in good repair and to maintain healthy environments for children. Thank you for your time and your thoughtful approach to addressing this need.
Thank you for joining us today. Representative Menapace has a question for you.
Thank you for joining us, Ms. Maynard Adams. I was wondering, so I'm also a New London public school teacher, and I know that we have received a lot of this information about some of the things that the town and the Board of Ed is having to do, including shuttering certain schools during the summer and things like this. But I was wondering in the specifics of this, of what do you think would be New London's first priority if this bill were to pass and they were able to receive this type of funding?
Speaking for me personally, and without having discussed this with my colleagues on the board or with the professionals in charge of things like building maintenance, I think probably addressing the air quality issues is certainly among my top priorities. We have as you know, we have a population, we're a poor city, and we have a population who reflect the poverty of our city. And many of these children live in homes where there's probably lead paint. There are air quality issues in the homes they live in. We have lots of children with asthma and other sorts of respiratory diseases. And so to me, providing good or addressing these air quality issues is a pretty important place to start.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Representative. And seeing no further questions, again, thank you for being here.
It looks like Rep. Constantine might have a
Oh, I'm
question.
sorry. Rep. Constantine, please.
Hi, thank you so much. You were talking about the air quality. Were you able to do anything under the ARPA funds to help address the air quality in your schools?
We used a lot of ARPA funds for maintenance. We replaced boilers. We replaced, my recollection is we replaced chillers and air handling equipment in one of our elementary schools. This is an elementary school. Actually, it was the first of our rebuilding projects. So it's been online maybe 20 years, 18 years, something like that. But the school that is the subject of my comments today was not part of that. So that has led us to, where we are right now.
Okay, great, thank you.
Sure. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, and sorry, Representative Constantine. Thank you for being with us. This time I really do not see further questions. Next up is Louise Williams.
Hi, good morning, Senator Fanfaro, Representative Horn, and members of the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee. I'm Louise Williams, president of CSU AUP, the union that represents almost 3,000 teaching faculty, librarians, counselors, coaches, and athletic trainers at the 4 state universities. I'm also a professor of history at Central Connecticut State University, a VP for Connecticut AFT, and a proud member of Connecticut for All. I'm testifying in support of House Bill 1528 about the need for a study of state taxation, but also to support a bold finance and tax package from your committee this year and support for flexibility on the so-called fiscal guardrails. All of this is important because the way our state's taxes are structured currently makes it impossible to develop our economic competitiveness. Much of this is due to the fact that Connecticut still has an outrageous level of inequality in the state. A more equitable tax system and the ability to spend sufficient funds on essential services is necessary to develop all our talent and resources. I can speak about one example, which I know best, which is the need to adequately fund higher education. And a better tax structure will make it possible for us to do this. Our public colleges and universities are the economic engines of Connecticut. It's well known that higher education provides higher salaries for individuals. Once they graduate from university, they will get jobs that pay $40,000 more per year on average. Businesses benefit with more skilled workers to fill currently fields that have shortages, but also to expand into fast-growing high-tech fields. Most of those fields requires bachelor's degrees. Higher income of these workers who go to college translates into more tax revenue for the state. It spurs more spending in local communities on housing, goods, and services, and it will do much to ease the inequality of Connecticut. We are a state where almost 100% of the children of the wealthiest families go to college, while only 70% of the poorest do not. Not only is this unfair, it's a waste. The poorest parts of our state are places where less than 25% of the population have bachelor's degrees. This is a pool of untapped talent that adequate state funding can address. If we provide opportunities for all residents to work hard to get a degree, we can become an education destination that will attract businesses and investment. So a better tax structure is very important in order to fund higher education. And it is especially important right now when our federal government is attacking higher education. We have presidential advisors who label college professors as the enemies at home. Our vice president gives speeches about how the universities are our enemies and vows to attack universities in this country. Funding is being withdrawn for research.
You have reached the 3 minutes. If you could please summarize.
There are threats to funding for Pell Grants. So I think it's very important to study ways in which we can address this problem and many others. Thank you.
And thank you. Representative Menapace.
Yes, thank you again, Chairman Horn. I had a lot of these. Professor Williams, I had a bit of an unrelated question. I think you gave me a C in at Central when I took your class on So I wanted to know. No, I'm just kidding. But I was hoping for this one. I very much appreciate you coming in to testify on this. I recognized you from your class on this one.
Yes.
But I was wondering what this is kind of This is kind of, I suppose, to the side on this one of what the kind of, well, I suppose the first issues that you are, or excuse me, the most important part that you are asking of what would be the best source of additional revenue for some of these universities, because you are facing the potential of significant cuts from the federal government.
We are. So if the state is probably going to have to pick up some of those costs if the federal government cuts them. But even if the federal government doesn't cut them, we haven't really been adequately funded for over a decade. And this is really unfortunate because, you know, there are many, many students who could use the extra income, who could use, you know, to fill shortages of jobs. So it's a problem even without the federal government, but it becomes much worse with the federal government. And it really will slow down sort of the economic development of Connecticut. So we're hoping that a study of the tax structure will, you know, come up with ways where creative ways where we can fund these essential services.
Thank you.
Thank you. Making sure I look online, seeing no further questions. Thanks for being with us. Next up, we have Iris White.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Fonfara, Chairwoman Horn, ranking members Fazio and Paletta, and distinguished members of the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee. My name is Iris White, and I am the Acting Superintendent for Bristol Public Schools. I'm testifying today in support of HB 7239, an act establishing a public school district repair and improvement project program. School district buildings, facilities, and grounds ensure a safe, efficient, and conducive learning environment for our students and staff. Furthermore, welcoming and well-maintained school buildings foster positive learning environments, boost student engagement and attendance, and can create a sense of community, ultimately impacting academic performance and well-being. In Bristol, while we will continue to strive to fulfill our mission to teach and learn with passion and purpose, it is becoming increasingly difficult to do so in facilities that desperately need repairs and updates. Like many districts, Bristol has fiscal challenges that have caused our district to delay critical repairs to some of our school buildings. Deferred maintenance has resulted in the need for costly repairs and replacement. These include replacements of exterior doors and frames, roof replacements, and upgrades to heating and fire systems. The DRIP program would allow districts to save money long-term by preventing costly repairs or replacements such as the ones I just described. This program would also allow unspent funds to be carried over beyond the end of each fiscal year, giving the districts extra flexibility in how and when the funding is used. Without the necessary funding, districts will continue to fall behind in creating the safe and effective learning environments our students deserve. These are not just building repairs, they are investments in our students' future and their ability to learn, grow, and succeed. I urge this committee to support House Bill 7239. Thank you for your time, consideration, and dedication to the improvement of our education system. And I'm open to answering any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you for being here and for joining many other representatives of schools across the state to talk about these issues. Seeing no questions, again, thanks and enjoy your day.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Patrick Gibson.
We're good. Thank you. Chairpersons Fonfara and Horn, ranking members Fazio and Paletta, and distinguished members of the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today in strong support of HB 7239. My name is Patrick Gibson, and I'm the Deputy Executive Director at the School and State Finance Project. Over the past 10 years of working with school districts, we've noticed a gap between the school building needs of districts and the projects that are currently supported through the State School Construction Grant Program. Connecticut's current program, while robust, does not support the minor capital repairs and improvements that are needed every year, such as a leaky roof, replacing a gym floor, or retrofitting classrooms to better serve students with disabilities. Municipal budget constraints, as you've heard today, mean these projects are often the first to be removed from a budget request, leading to unsafe, unhealthy, and declining facilities that may need major renovations in the future. The bill before you would address this issue by establishing the District Repair and Improvement Project Program, a new minor capital improvement program modeled after LoCIP, which provides predictable state assistance to municipalities for infrastructure. This program would create a similar dedicated funding stream for minor school repairs and improvements. The need for such a program is clear. Research has shown the condition of school buildings impacts student health and outcomes. Exposure to mold, poor ventilation, extreme temperatures, poor lighting, and excessive noise all can disrupt students trying to focus and succeed, and educators trying to teach. We know students in disadvantaged communities are more likely to attend schools in poor condition, which further creates education inequities. Like I said, the state does make significant investments in school construction by reimbursing municipalities for new buildings and major renovations. Establishing this program would complement this effort and protect the state's investment by helping districts maintain their buildings and avoid deferring maintenance that could lead to costly repairs. To effectively and equitably distribute funding, we propose an initial allocation of $30 million, which is consistent with LoCIP's historical amount. We have developed a grant formula for your consideration that is aligned with other state education grants that takes into account district enrollment and town wealth, along with a flat grant to ensure all public school districts do receive some support. We are incredibly grateful for the General Assembly's commitment to Connecticut students, along with its recent significant investments in K-12 education. And I urge this committee to support this important initiative to continue these critical investments in our communities. Thank you for your time and consideration and the opportunity to testify here today. I am happy to answer any questions on the bill or the program that you may have.
Thank you. I am happy that, I view this bill, among other things, as a way for, it can be a money-saving opportunity, as you've suggested, because, to the extent that we can enable the kinds of maintenance and repairs that can keep us from having to do an entire school reconstruction, that's a good thing.
Yes.
And we struggle with that sometimes at the state, ignoring cutting small stuff and then having to pay big in the longer term. Representative Rader.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hi, good to see you, and thank you for testifying on this. Quick question for you. Where did you, I'm curious, well, two things. One is when we have the school construction program, what is the typical threshold? I mean, if you don't know this, I'm just curious. I mean, I think I know it, but as you said, it's for new construction or significant renovations. So is there some bottom threshold that we are missing for school districts?
I think it's a lot of the projects that you've heard today. If a roof leaks and then that gets on the cafeteria floor, they have to replace the tiles and check for mold, that kind of thing. Those couple $100,000 projects, et cetera, that really do add up in a district's budget is a really good target for this program.
No, I agree. I still sit on my board of ed, and every year the line we put in for facilities, kind of the emergency line of just unanticipated projects.
Mm-hmm.
Sadly, it's always the thing that gets cut when the budgets are being made because it's not affecting the students directly. So I appreciate that. And the second one is, where did you come up with the recommended $30 million in your original recommendation?
So that we looked at the historical LoCIP amount of $30 million. I know it has increased recently, but we figured we would go back to the historical average at this point.
Okay, good. And like you said, this money can get carried over in their revolving fund. Most districts have like a 2% of the operating, the annual budget. So that is the intention with this, and there wouldn't be some kind of timeline determinant on it, correct?
No, that's correct.
Okay, thank
Obviously,
you.
we would prefer districts to be using these to
Right.
fix the
Well, to your point, we had pipes freeze in our middle school. The sprinkler system flooded numerous offices. I mean, thankfully we had the funds to go in, but if a district didn't have that carpeting, furniture, ceiling tiles, it would have become a much bigger issue. All right, well, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Seeing no, Representative Constantine.
Hey, thank you, Madam Chair.
Sir.
Thank you so much for coming in to testify. We've all worked with town budgets quite a bit. Would you be able to kind of talk about how we ensure that the town's current investment in your schools and maintenance would work with the DRIP program so that the DRIP isn't replacing what you were going to do to begin with?
Sure. So we've in the bills before us specifically notes that funds for the DRIP program cannot be used as a local matching for any state assistance program. And it also specifically calls out that these funds cannot be used for projects that would be eligible for the existing school construction reimbursement. So we see these as kind of separate but complementary funding streams.
Okay, just to clarify, I kind of meant in your current school budget that is funded from, in your current school budget, why this wouldn't just kind of come in to replace money that you would be putting in for normal maintenance.
So I do not represent a public school district or
Okay.
or a town, but I would defer to the colleagues who are testifying today.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I got my speaker titles mixed up.
There will be another opportunity for that question, I'm quite certain. Seeing no further questions, thank you for your work and for being with us. Before we move to the next speaker, I want to note there are a couple people who are testifying online. We have multiple people who are entering the Zoom conversation with the same name. And we can only promote one of you as the actual person signed up. So if there are a group of you that are signed up under the same name, please just put one person in the Zoom conversation and we will promote that person when we have only one, because we can't tell which one you are. So I'm gazing at our administrative staff over here, but I believe that next person up is Patrick Rowland. Nope. Do we have a singular Cynthia Sparago yet? Oh, in the room.
I believe those are my children sitting home watching. Senator Fanfara, Representative Horn, and members of the committee. I'm here today on behalf of the Shoreline Association for the Enforcement of Residents' Rights in partial support for HB 7238. When one considers the impacts of short-term rentals on communities, they frequently think about the noise, parties, and trash. But rarely is the number of strangers or the loss of resident families and housing considered. In 2019, my husband Mike and I brought our East Haven home. We looked at beach communities all along the East Coast, but settled on East Haven because of the quiet, generational family neighborhoods along the beach. It was wonderful until one by one, elders passed on and the homes were sold to investors to be used as commodities, with some making $1,000 a night. Today, my once quiet neighborhood of 45 homes is 9 short-term rentals in it. That's 20% of my neighborhood. And while I've lost neighbors, I've gained, without exaggeration, more than 180 transient strangers each summer month. At our last town council hearing on short-term rentals, Theo, a 12-year-old boy from the Morgan Point neighborhood, said it best when he described how he loved his home, but he really wished that there were more children to play with. His neighborhood has 10 short-term rentals. The families, they're all gone. Back in 2021, our almost 2-mile stretch of the beach had 17 short-term rentals. It now has close to 60. We no longer live in residential neighborhoods, but rather bustling commercial hotel districts that most of us didn't ask for or expect when we purchased our homes. I'm certain you've heard from investors that people should be able to do whatever they want with their property. As vice chair of the East Haven ZBA, I would impress upon you that I have an entire book of zoning regulations that say otherwise. Everything from how tall of a fence you can build to needing to reside in your home to run an in-home business. Are short-term rentals not a business? I fully support the registry list requirement of 7238. I hope the list would be made available to the public. All home buyers should be able to see if their potential neighborhood has been decimated by the incursion of the short-term rentals before they purchase. Finally, while I commend this committee for considering a tax on revenue to help support home building initiatives, I don't think it's enough. East Haven is already house saturated, with few parcels left for building. I fear this tax will do little to help that initiative. What we need are regulations and initiatives that turn our houses back into the family homes they were intended to be. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Representative Rader has a question for you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for testifying. Good to see you. So I have a question for you regarding this registry. How would that be a helpful tool for everything you just laid out for us in terms of the challenges you're facing in East Haven? Like, I'm curious to hear how you see that playing into the benefit of counteracting the frustrations you clearly have.
If nothing is done in my town to regulate what's going on currently, then I will move. And I would love to have a registry list that I could look at as a potential home buyer and see where the clusters, because we know from statistics, those short-term rental homes tend to be in clusters in neighborhoods. And I could avoid that neighborhood because I wouldn't want to get into the situation that I'm in now.
Okay, I appreciate that. And then my only other question is to you is, what are you considering? And I know we've talked offline, so I'm curious, what are you in East Haven considering as some solutions to what you're seeing as kind of an investment pocket, you know, along the shoreline?
The biggest thing that the residents who live in those areas are asking for is that there be a primary residence requirement for any short-term rental listing. So if you own your home and you live in your home for 6 months, 183 days, and you want to be a snowbird, you want to take vacation, you can short-term rental your house. Or if you're a full-time resident and you want to short-term rental a room in your home while you're living there, then that's fine. But if you're an outside investor with no ties to the community, and we have them from as far away as California, Utah, Tennessee, then you are relegated to renting your home in a more traditional manner. You can still rent for Airbnb, for visiting nurses. You can also rent for academic rentals. You can do monthly rentals, just not this every 2-day turnover of 6 people partying, or as the house on Morgan Point, the wedding venue that gets rented every weekend. The owner lives in New York City, and they bragged about $175,000 income off of that rental last year. And income, the no exaggeration, DATCO full-size buses, coach buses with caterers and live bands, flowers, the whole bit, for a wedding in the middle of a neighborhood every weekend.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Anyone else? How about where you live? What are you experiencing?
We have, as I said, 20% of my neighborhood is now short-term rental homes. The home next door, the home across the street, the home 2 doors down.
Right,
It's a
but what are
cluster.
the conditions that you're experiencing? I hear what you're saying, that a number of homes in your neighborhood are experiencing this, but what do you see happening?
So one of the first rentals we had, I was outside on my backyard, which is the beach, and I'm raking shells because you rake them out so that you have nice sand. And in the short-term rental next door, there was a very loud, aggressive adult, young adult, maybe 20-year-old, possibly special needs, but we don't know, who came bursting out of that house, screaming at his top of his lungs towards me. And then another adult came out of the house behind him screaming, "Ma'am, hold on to that rake." It was terrifying. And that owner eventually came and subdued the person, took them away. And we found out later they did $8,000 of damage inside that home. And the really interesting part about it was we contacted Airbnb to make a complaint. And Airbnb said, "We've never heard of that rental." But Airbnb paid the owner the $8,000 in damage.
I mean, that's a quality of life issue. And does your town handle quality of life issues at all?
They do, and we have called the police numerous times. You know, Yale University rents the home next door as a retreat. They'll bring in 35, 40 kids for the day and the night. And then at midnight, they all call Ubers and they're all screaming outside, running around, and the Ubers will come and pick them up. You know, we've tried the police, we've tried all of that. But for me, the biggest concern is I bought a house in a neighborhood. I bought a house which is an R3 district in East Haven, which is kind of middle of the road. And what I've gotten myself into is living next door to a hotel.
I understand what you're saying. My question is with respect to your town leadership, what actions have they taken to not just help you, but that you say this is a neighborhood that's being impacted?
Right. They are currently in the process of writing an ordinance. We are hoping they are considering primary residency as part of it. You know, they do have included a registry list in town and a 24/7 hotline for residents. But I think until both towns and state get a grip on the proliferation and the use of our homes as commodities, it's a difficult thing to regulate.
Thank you. Seeing no one online. Thank you.
Thank you.
Stephen Jakobczyk.
Good morning, Chairpersons Fonfara and Horn, ranking members Fazio and Paletta, and distinguished members of the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee. Thanks for having me on this morning. I'm here to talk about support of House Bill 7239 and act establishing a public school district repair and improvement project program. Just echoing some of the previous superintendents. My name's Steve Jakobczyk, and I have the honor of serving as a superintendent in Union, small rural school district, Northeast Connecticut, and definitely the smaller schools in the Northeast area is basically the central focal point of many of the towns. And with the support of this grant, I look at it as an investment in the future, and also based on the significant increases in products and services, I think this would probably be a savings for local taxpayers in the state of making these minor capital improvements. I will say, as I think Steve Rio mentioned before, usually in terms of capital improvements, it's the first thing to go in any type of budget, and also using surplus funds at the end of the year to put a Band-Aid on some things. So this would be significant for a town the size of Union, of just being able to do the parking lots, having the roof repairs, lighting. And again, I do have concerns over the increases just in terms of any type of projects and products, and really being able to map out a strategic plan in terms of the capital improvement, and knowing if we could count on these funds and use them strategically in a non-lapsing account, then we could really prepare and budget for that. And I also think it would be a really good selling point to the town of knowing that we have these state funds, so that local taxpayers know that it's just not coming out of their wallet, and the state does support that. So again, I appreciate you taking the time. I'm open to any questions, and hope you have a great rest of the morning.
Questions for Mr. Jakobczyk? I'll just say that, I walk by some of the projects that we as legislators support, and very often is the reason why that project gets to where it is. And there's a sign there, has the governor's name, has the department agency's commissioner's name, has the mayor's name, but I never see Representative Winter's name or Rader's name, or how about Representative Napoli's name, who spends countless hours on the bonding subcommittee? I think we ought to change that this year, because you folks do hard work. And I'm saying this to you, Mr. Jakobczyk, because I hear your point that I listen to what you're saying, that the legislature ought to be recognized, but we never get recognized. We send home property tax credits, and we get no credit for it. Seeing no questions, thank you, sir.
Representative Constantine is online.
I'm sorry, I looked and I didn't.
Oh, no worries, no worries. Mr. Jakobczyk, thank you so much for testifying. Your district, you've described your district. Our districts here have the same issues regarding, maintenance is the first thing to go when, budgets get tight. Can you, what portion of maintenance projects are you able to keep in your budget by the time the school budget's decided?
Yeah, very little. What we've been if any, quite frankly, what we've done in recent years, we've had to use surplus funding. So we wind down to the end of the year, I usually prepare a list of prioritized items for the board, just saying like, if we have this much money, these are the things we need to do. Within the past few years, we've had to do some maintenance and repairs on our water system. So we have to do ongoing testing and to ensure that whole water system functions appropriately, just to provide safe water for our community. We've had to redo our lighting in the gym, and also, you know, this was little while back, but doing the parking lot. So not huge dollars and cents. I think with the state school finance, with that bill, I think Union would receive about $30,000, which is not a lot of money, but for Union, it's about 1.6% of our total budget. So that is certainly significant. So just putting that in my budget, or the school's budget, you know, if we come in at a 3.4 budget, it's up to 5, just with that $30,000. So it would greatly impact our district. And I think looking at it again in a strategic way, and knowing that we have the support of the state, and I think, again, as a marketing tool, that would be a really good selling point to local taxpayers and town officials, because we could do something very efficiently, and again, I think it would yield savings down the road.
And just one further question, Mr. Chair. Could you describe like kind of a top of mind project that this the DRIP program would be able to address, that is important for you to address and fix and maintain, but you just haven't been able to get to it given your funding?
Yeah, we've the HVAC system has been obviously for numerous districts. We are in a newer building, so that's a good thing, but we just had our drives replaced over the past couple of years. That alone, that was $10,000 just for the drives. Having a pump on our circulator pump was about $8,000. So one current thing we have outstanding right now is a damper on our HVAC system. So ensuring that works correctly. I would say the priority would be the HVAC system. And again, it's not that old, but we're already seeing things. We've already invested in it, and we want to continue invest in it because that is a huge deal, and definitely more fortunate because our building isn't too old, but nonetheless, those repairs are there and needed. So that would be my number one piece. And then everything else with plumbing to electrical and lighting.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Thank you. Pat Bradbury. Oh, I'm sorry, that was Pat. Ed Hawthorne.
The last speaker was Stephen. Pat is next.
Is Pat here? Pat Bradbury. Steve, Ed, you're up.
I am here. I'm sorry.
He says in person, but he's, nope, okay. You have the floor, sir.
Thank you. Chairpersons Fonfara and Horn, ranking members Fazio, Paletta, and distinguished members of the Finance Review and Bonding Committee. Thank you for the opportunity to offer testimony in support of the HB 7239. My name is Patrick Bradbury. I'm the Director of Facilities for the Milford Public Schools, and I'm President of the CSBGA, the Connecticut Schools and Building and Grounds Association. In districts like Milford, we take great pride in providing high-quality education and maintaining safe, welcoming school environments. But year after year, we're forced to make difficult decisions that nearly always prioritize student learning and classroom support, as they should. Unfortunately, this means facility maintenance often takes a backseat. Small but necessary capital projects, things like door replacements, restroom renovations, flooring upgrades, or roof maintenance, they're routinely deferred. Not because they aren't needed, but because there simply isn't enough funding available to cover all of them. Over time, these deferred projects pile up, and what began as manageable maintenance becomes a more costly and disruptive issue. The DRIP program would give districts like Milford a dedicated, predictable source of funding to help handle these exact types of needs. It would allow us to take a more proactive approach to facility care, something that's extremely difficult to do when resources are limited and competing priorities demand immediate attention. In Milford, I've had to defer such projects as masonry repairs, 50 and 60-year-old locker replacements, classroom cabinet replacement, and mechanical room upgrades. We've had to spend significant dollars on expensive repairs instead of replacing dated equipment. We know students and staff thrive in a well-maintained environment. Let's remember, to many Connecticut's children, these schools are the safest place they will ever be. DRIP would support the behind-the-scenes work that keeps building operationals and safe. Work that often goes unnoticed, but is critical to the success of our schools and student achievement. I respectfully urge the committee to support HB 7239 and help districts like Milford and all the school districts in Connecticut address these long-standing facility challenges. And thank you for your time and your commitment to Connecticut Public Schools.
Mr. Bradbury, when you said that the school may, so for some children, be the safest place they'll ever be, what were you referring to? What communities?
What I mean by that is our guys, our Connecticut building and grounds, we take great pride in making sure that our schools are safe, are clean, because a lot of the kids spend more time at our schools than they do at home. And we want to make sure they're a great place for them to thrive.
I get that, but your statement was that this may be the safest place they'll ever be. You're referring to Milford when you say that?
I'm referring to the school environment. That's all, sir.
But the implication is that you believe that where they are otherwise is not safe.
No, I don't. I just believe that we give them a safe environment to thrive in. That's all I meant by that. I'm sorry.
Questions for Mr. Bradbury? Thank you, sir. Ed, you're up. Ed Hawthorne.
Good morning, Senator Fanfara, Representative Horn, distinguished members of the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee. My name is Ed Hawthorne. I'm proud to serve as president of the Connecticut AFL-CIO, federation of hundreds of local unions representing approximately 250,000 working people here in the state of Connecticut. It is on their behalf and in conjunction with Connecticut for All that I'm here to testify regarding SB 1528, an act concerning a study of taxation. So the scope of 1528 should also address the immediate challenges affecting residents and the broader disinvestment in critical public services. We all know there's two Connecticut's, one for the rich, one for the poor. Perfectly demonstrated when you drive down I-95, you see concentrated poverty in Bridgeport, followed by extreme, unimaginable wealth in multi-million-dollar homes throughout the Gold Coast. We have high levels of unmet need in Connecticut. You don't need to take my word for it. I look forward to reading every year, and by the time I'm done with it, I'm always dumbfounded by how we don't address it. But the Alice report put out by the United Way, 40% of our state is unable to meet their basic needs: housing, food, healthcare, childcare, transportation. We've underfunded public programs for too long. We have $4 billion in our rainy day fund. We have a surplus dollars approaching $1 billion. But nevertheless, our critical public services are deeply underfunded: public education, special education, affordable housing and childcare, affordable healthcare options. The so-called fiscal guardrails prioritize financial reserves over investment in future generations, which just exacerbates the inequalities that are already in front of our face. Federal impacts. Since January 20th of 2025, with the new administration in Washington, they have pursued policies that dismantle federal agencies and safety nets, including veterans health care, the closure of the Department of Education, privatization of Social Security, cutting nearly $1 billion from Medicaid's, forcing states like Connecticut to absorb the cost. It's the state's responsibility to fill these funding gaps for essential services, but we have opportunities under 1528 to redesign the tax structure to be more equitable, particularly in the income tax system, to be more fair to working and middle-class families, strengthen the revenue generation by developing a revenue structure that supports critical public services, address federal cuts with bold action to create a tax framework that ensures sustainability and stability for Connecticut residents, propose solutions, capital gain surcharge, statewide property tax and high valued homes over $3 million. That's extremely high valued. I doubt anyone in this room has a $3 million home. Close the carried interest tax loophole, a digital ad tax, worldwide combined recording to prevent multinational corporations from shifting profits to low tax jurisdictions, introduce a new income tax bracket for people that earn over $1 million, aligning us with Massachusetts has had great success. They
You've reached
implemented-
3 minutes. Please summarize.
All right, so we need to respond to federal Medicaid cuts, just like Minnesota has with SF 2867, which produces a new income tax tier. We need bold legislation. We need to reform the guardrails, and we need to ensure that this concentrated poverty that we've held as acceptable for way too long needs to change. We need visionary policies, and we stand ready to support these efforts. So thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Ed. Representative Paletta has a question for you.
Thank you, Ed, for your comments. And I just have a brief question. I've spent a lot of time over my last several years in the legislature looking at our state, how it's built, and I can respect your comments and I understand where you're coming from in terms of our tax structure. What I think you neglected to mention, and maybe you want to expound on it, is that Connecticut right now is one of the most expensive places in the nation to live. Connecticut right now, if a single parent makes $50,000 a year right now, they're barely making ends meet. They can't afford to pay any bills. There's a lot of anger and frustration in that community, and I would think that's a large portion of our state, right? Many of the people you're speaking about. And I'll go as far as to say the results of the last election reflected that. I think a lot of people around our country are angry that they can't get by on what was once a middle-class salary, that now, and it's not a Democrat or Republican issue, it's a fact that you work a middle-class job, you're a teacher, you're a factory worker. Before taxes, right? You look at your paycheck at the end of the year, you don't have anything left. That's a problem. People can't afford to buy groceries. They can't afford to put gas in their car. They can't afford leisure. People have to choose between sending their kid to daycare or working a job. What's going on in this state and around the country is awful. And there's frustration. And that's why people came out in large numbers last year and voted, because they're sick and tired of politicians spending more and taking their hard-earned money and, quite frankly, wasting it. So the fiscal guardrails that you mentioned, I'll give you a minute to respond. The fiscal guardrails that you mentioned have worked for Connecticut. What they've done is achieved massive amounts of savings in each year's budget to be used to programs that you're talking about. Now, the problem is, in my opinion, I'm going to let you respond, is that we have not indexed those savings. So we don't know where that money is, but it's in there. Would you support indexing the savings of the fiscal guardrails to use to programs that you're talking about?
Something interesting to take a look at. The fiscal guardrails definitely need to be loosened. Your district from Watertown is a perfect example of this. You have Watertown and you have Oakville, right? And
Waterbury.
And a little bit of Waterbury too. You're in Waterbury now. That's new. But your district's a perfect example. Oakville is much different than Watertown, and they have different needs. And the only thing that we're talking about here, capital gain surcharge. Someone making $50,000 a year is not worried about that, but they're worried about their kids getting special education services. I'm sure you read the Waterbury paper just like I do every single morning. There was an article in there about basically tearing apart the Naugatuck School District because they lack the funding. They're closing the oldest school in Naugatuck. They're laying off 16 teachers, a bunch of other full-time staff. And you know as well as I do, Naugatuck's part of where the concentrated poverty is. They're not over by Taft School in Watertown. They're in the borough of Naugatuck. and they need those services. They're more needy. That's what we're talking about supporting, is those kids that are otherwise become disconnected and left behind. So capital gain surcharge, that's not affecting people making $50,000 a year because they work for a living. They don't live off money, which capital gains is. Statewide property tax and high valued homes, $3 million. There is not one home in Oakville or in your section of Waterbury that is worth $3 million. Carried interest tax loophole, that's not affecting people that earn 50 grand a year. Digital ad tax, that's going to be paid for by tech companies that make more and more money, announcing record profits every single year. In the worldwide combined reporting, this is very interesting to me, because if a corporation can shift their profits to a lower tax district, that's not something that we should be putting up with here in Connecticut. We don't do it in the unemployment system. It's called pseudo dumping, and it's illegal. When somebody opens up a new business that has the lower experience rating and they dump all their salary into there so they pay a lower tax. We need to close these loopholes so we can support the services. So towns like, or cities like Naugatuck aren't laying off 16 teachers and forcing kids into already overcrowded classrooms. I was joking this morning, and it shouldn't even be a joke, but they're going to end up with stadium seating in some of these classrooms because there's just not the space for them. They already have portable classrooms in Western. They're adding like 200 students to there. This is simply unacceptable, and we've done it for too long. And I'm not saying blow up the guardrails and get rid of all of them, but we need to meet the moment. And with the cuts coming from the federal government, $1 billion from Medicaid, I mean, almost half the children born in this state are born under Medicaid. What is that going to do to working class families that are already struggling to get by and are frustrated, just like you said? We need to say that we have their back. And here in Connecticut, we need to show what our values are, and we need to fight back against these draconian cuts that have nothing to do with waste, fraud, and abuse. It has to do with cutting taxes for corporations and ultra rich people that won't even notice, so they can buy more yachts than they can buy a country club. They want to buy islands, whatever it is, and shoot their friends into space. We're talking about taxing the people that won't even notice to help the people that are struggling to get by every single day.
And I appreciate that. And I'll just say, my comments were more aligned with the fiscal guardrails. I will say we tried taxing more in the past, and you know what happened up until 2017. We were taxing plastic bags, prepared meals, I mean, everything under the sun, and it didn't work, right? I mean, Connecticut had deficit after deficit, tax increase after tax increase, and people just had enough. So ultimately, it led us to putting these fiscal guardrails in place, which is the crux of my question, that those districts, for instance, I'm just going to focus on education for a minute. Would you be supportive of indexing the savings from the fiscal guardrails to be returned to the most needy districts so that they can realize the savings as a result of our good fiscal policy here in Hartford?
Have been able to
It's a
dig
yes,
in on
it's
that.
a yes or no. Would you support indexing the money so that way it can be directly helping those students that need it, rather than being swallowed up in the general fund and used in areas that you and I both will never be able to get into in this discussion? But would you support indexing the money so it can be used for education?
Love to give you a yes or a no. Happy to have that discussion outside once I'm able to dig into that a little bit more. But to go into
No, thank you.
Minor,
Okay,
two questions,
thank you.
5 minutes.
But since you mentioned education, I talked about Massachusetts. They implemented a 4% surtax on incomes over $1 million. It generated $1.5 billion in its first year. That revenue funded free school lunches. That helps the single mom. Infrastructure. Ours is falling apart. We need to fix that. Expanded public college access. Public education is becoming more and more expensive, and we need to do that. All those things help working class families, and it's generating revenue from people that will not even notice that revenue loss because they're taxed a little bit more, and frankly tax their fair share from the society that they benefit from. But happy to have that conversation with you once I can look more deeply into that.
Senator Fazio.
Thank you, Mr. Hawthorne, for your testimony. I noticed in your testimony, verbal and written, you hearkened to some of the tax increases that California, New York, and New Jersey have implemented as examples of success stories. Do you know by chance the trends in population growth in those three states in particular in recent years?
Not offhand, sir.
Well, altogether, those three states have lost over 1.2 million people just since 2020, 2021 with those high taxes and with those tax increases. You know, touting probably the worst examples of economic failure in the states which are bleeding their middle classes as arguments for all these tax increases that are being supported in this testimony, you know, probably makes most legislators less likely to support them. Connecticut has had among the 5 highest tax burdens in the country for many years, and we haven't. You yourself, delineate it. We have seen very little income growth for the middle class. We have seen insufficient job growth for the middle class, but it's under a regime where we have very high taxes. And some of the only examples of states that have raised taxes even more have seen historic population loss. I mean, the idea of over 600,000 people fleeing California with the most amazing weather and geography in the entire country in just the recent years, with the tax proposals that you're supporting, is, I think, as strong an evidence of the failure of high tax states and high tax regimes as one could possibly offer. So, I'm wondering if these examples of population loss and economic failure in the very states whose proposals you're touting gives you any pause in advocating for more taxes in a high tax state like Connecticut.
California is one of the highest GDPs, if not, I believe, the highest GDP in the entire nation, which is most than most small countries have. So to call their economy or people loss not a success, they also, those states that we mentioned have some of, and Connecticut's in that conversation too, to have one of the best public schools in the entire country. So we need income in order to keep us at that high level, because we all know that the great equalizer is public education. And that's what we're asking, is to fund public services and social safety nets, because the cuts are coming from DC. And the people that are struggling the most here in Connecticut are going to be the ones affected. And if they're going to get a tax cut at the federal level, well, we're going to need to fill that hole. And it shouldn't be on the backs of the middle class and the working class. It should be on the backs of the people that are benefiting from the policies that are coming out of DC. That's what this is. We need transformative tax structure that levels the playing field for everyone. And that's what we're advocating for here today. So not regressive taxes like a bag tax or anything like that, but an income tax that reflects the reality of our tax base here in Connecticut, where the ultra rich pay less simply because they're paid in dividends. And then we can't use a certain percentage of that income in order to support public services that working people need, because we consider it to be volatile when it's proven time after time and surplus after surplus to not be volatile whatsoever. So that's what we're looking for here, is some transformative change to support the public services that working people depend on.
Again, California has the highest supplemental poverty rate in the country. That's considered the most accurate measure of poverty by most of economists. They have the highest supplemental poverty measure in the entire country. The state with the very proposals that this testimony is advocating for, with major tax increases, it's hurting everybody. Connecticut has already increased taxes substantially over the last 15 years and seen little, if any, economic benefit from it. Our social services, I don't think, are adequate to all the revenue that we're charged in our taxes. I think that we can do far better. I think that we should aim towards a major middle class tax break in this state. My caucus has proposed a $1,000 middle class tax break for the average family, a middle income family in the state. I think that would pay enormous economic dividends. It would make the state more affordable and help it grow. But I just cannot support any proposal that would raise taxes more in the second highest tax state in the country. I think it will lead to more economic failure. Don't California my Connecticut. We're already in bad enough shape already. We should be able to do far better, but it's not by copying, I think, the worst economic leadership in the country. So thank you for your testimony, and thank you for the time, Mrs. Chair.
Either way. What further questions? Representative Rader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hi, Ed. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
You mentioned Massachusetts, and I was just speaking with my colleagues about this. I had the good fortune to get to know the Lieutenant Governor, Kim Driscoll. We did a fellowship together. And it was right after the time that they had passed, as she called it, the millionaire tax. And I said, first of all, how did you sell something that you openly coined that? And she said, because we brought them all to the table. We didn't just issue a tax without a clear definitive goal for why we were doing it. In their case, they paid for universal school meals, they paid for school construction, many nonprofit programs, and they had private investors also come to the table to get those programs off the ground. So what they did was really unique because they had buy-in from the community. And I can understand my colleagues here talking about, we just can't create blanket panel, a list of taxes without having some buy-in and some understanding. And so my question to you is, in this list that you came up with, like grabbing all this revenue, what are your top priorities? You know, if you had 3 priorities in terms of the revenue stream, say from something like a millionaire's tax, what do you think are the top priorities that working families and those struggling would actually feel on a day? Because my theory is it's around education, school meals, feeding our kids, taking care of families' budgets, things like that. So I'm curious to hear, after you kind of created this list, what do you see as the top priorities?
So first of all, I had the opportunity to meet Lieutenant Governor Driscoll at a regional council meeting up in Boston. She's great, so I share your praise for her there. I mean, public education needs to be supported. That's suffering. We need funding. Special education needs to be supported. Affordable housing and childcare is a drain on both the working class and business here in Connecticut. We need to have affordable childcare. We need to have affordable housing, and that needs to happen like yesterday. And also affordable healthcare options. People shouldn't be going bankrupt because they have a healthcare emergency. So those all together should be our shared Connecticut values of supporting the affordability for the working class and the middle class. So if we're able to generate more revenue that we can actually spend by loosening the fiscal guardrails, then supporting those things, I think, should have broad support. And anyone who doesn't support it, I'd love to have a conversation with them and explain why working people are suffering each and every single day. I mean, we're talking about the people that get a bill in the mail and they look at it and say, I don't know how I'm going to pay this, versus the people that we're looking to get revenue from that look at a bill in the mail and say, okay, someone will take care of it. That's what we're advocating for here, is getting revenue to support vital public services. And I think we can all agree that housing, education, childcare, and healthcare are vital to the health of this state and the future of our economy here.
Okay, thank you for answering that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Seeing no one online. Further questions? Thank Representative Winter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for your testimony. I was just looking at population figures for New Jersey and Massachusetts, and it looks like they've both experienced net increases in population since passing millionaires' taxes. Why might that be? Why might states in the Northeast experience net increases in population after a millionaire's tax?
Well, people in my generation, I'm an elder millennial, I can still talk to you about dial-up, but people in my generation are putting off having kids because we simply aren't financially sound enough to do that. We look at the cost of childcare, look at the cost of living, and we've been putting it off and off and off. So if we feel more secure in the state that we're in, we're more likely to have children. And then that population growth goes up, or people moving into the state because their state, if they're moving from a state that doesn't have that high quality public education, they see that being supported by a millionaire's tax, just as they did in Massachusetts. They might be moving into that state to take advantage of those services because we all want a better life for our children than we have for ourselves. So that could possibly be it, but I'm sure there's a multitude of factors.
So your argument would be that by lowering costs for working class families, those states might see an increase in population, even if you're raising taxes on the very wealthy.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Seeing no one else. Thank you, Ed.
Thank you.
Thomas Anderson.
Good afternoon. I'm Thomas Anderson, Superintendent of East Hartford Public Schools. I'm joined with my Facilities Director here this afternoon and here to provide testimony on House Bill 7239, an act establishing a public school district repair and improvement project program. So welcome. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you this afternoon, Chairpersons Fafana, Horn, Ranking Members Fazio and Paletta, and distinguished members of the Finance, Revenue, and Board Committee. In East Hartford, our school buildings are more than just structures. They are the foundation of our students' learning experiences, yet maintaining these facilities have become an increasing challenge. The majority of our schools are 6 to 7 decades old. Most were built between 1949 and 1966, with our newest school being built in 2004. Despite our best efforts to maintain them, time continues to take its toll, and the need for renovations and upgrades grow with each passing year. Currently, many small but impactful facility upgrade projects such as bathroom renovations, classroom modernizations, athletic enhancements, and parking lot repairs are now eligible for DAS grant support. This leaves districts like East Hartford with a challenging choice: either defer these necessary projects or rely entirely on local funding, which is never guaranteed. We have a comprehensive 5-year capital improvement plan that encompasses a variety of these smaller but essential projects. However, due to funding constraints, and many of these projects are put on hold. When we delay renovations, we don't just postpone improvements, we also increase long-term costs and at times minimize the accessibility and quality of our school campuses, which impacts working conditions. This bill will provide consistent, reliable funding to support facility expansion for special education programs and classroom modernizations to increase educational opportunities. This investment would ensure that our schools meet the evolving needs of our students for generations to come. The future of our schools depends on action now, and supporting this bill represents an investment in safer, stronger, and more innovative schools. The ability for school districts to set aside up to 2% of their budget in a non-lapsing reserve for capital improvements is an excellent step, but it's simply not enough to meet the growing demands of aging school buildings. These funds are often stretched thin, and they don't accumulate fast enough to address large-scale maintenance needs. When districts must rely on additional municipal funding, they face delays, reductions, or even denials due to competing budget priorities. This sometimes leaves critical infrastructure projects on hold indefinitely. The temporary boost from federal ESSER funding allowed us to make critical improvements, particularly to indoor air quality. However, like other school districts across Connecticut, we now face the new challenge of maintaining and sustaining these improvements without a long-term funding solution. Without any additional resources, these very investments made our schools healthier and safer could become financial burdens, and the backlog of urgent facility needs will only grow. The DRIP program would be a tremendous and transformative solution, providing a predictable source of funding for smaller capital projects. It would empower districts like East Hartford to move forward with essential renovations without having to navigate complex grant restrictions or rely on uncertain local funding to address pressing infrastructure needs. The DRIP program would complement existing funding mechanisms, helping us to better plan and execute facility improvements in a timely and cost-effective way. In conclusion, the DRIP program is more than just a funding mechanism. It's a proactive investment in our teaching and learning environments and in the long-term success of public schools in Connecticut. By supporting this initiative, you are ensuring that schools have the resources to stay ahead of maintenance challenges, maximize taxpayer funds, and create the best possible learning conditions for every child. Modern and well-maintained school facilities are essential for student success. The working conditions for staff and students require that we commit to a sustainable solution that gives all students the facilities they need to succeed and compete globally. I urge the committee to support HB 7239 so districts like East Hartford can make the necessary improvements to provide students with the high-quality learning environments. Thank you for your time and consideration. We appreciate your support for this critical investment in Connecticut schools, and we would definitely recognize all the members in our literature. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Questions? Thank you, sir. Norma Martinez Hosang.
Hi, dear Senator Fonfara, Representative Horn, and members of the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee. Thank you for holding this hearing today. My name is Norma Martinez Hosang. I live in Hamden, and I'm the director of the Connecticut for All Coalition. Connecticut for All is a statewide coalition of over 60 faith, labor, and community organizations fighting for a fully funded for fully funded public services and equitable budget. Thanks for the opportunity to testify today in support of SB 1528, a study of state taxation, as well to for me to speak more broadly about the need for a bold finance and tax package from your committee this year. Overall, our coalition supports the concept to study certain taxes imposed by Connecticut. We propose, however, to expand the reasons for that study beyond developing the economic competitiveness of the state, as outlined by the bill language. Our state faces unprecedented challenges, from rising housing and food prices to incoming attacks from the administration in Washington. And it's clear that our inequitable tax structure is not working for working people, especially when it comes to income taxes. We propose additional language to the study to show how our tax structure can more effectively fund services, reduce inequality among our residents, and account for massive federal tax cuts this administration is planning to give the ultra wealthy. We believe that this is the best way for our state to be truly competitive, instead of having 40% of Connecticut residents struggle to afford basic needs. Additionally, Connecticut for All urges this committee to take the opportunity this season and release a bold finance package that can help mitigate harm to CT residents and prepare for our state to weather budget cuts to critical programs. At a moment when the Trump tax cuts will let millionaires and billionaires off the hook, Connecticut has a real opportunity to divert that revenue previously in federal government coffers from their pockets and back into Connecticut. Billions of dollars have already been diverted from funding important social and economic supports like healthcare, childcare, public K through 12, and higher education, which adds to the barriers children and young people face on a day-to-day basis. The legislature has the power to act by fixing the fiscal roadblocks, implementing progressive taxation, to make for a decrease in taxes from the federal government, and making the investments working families deserve. We should study taxes, but more than that, let's meet this political moment. The Finance Committee has the opportunity to show real leadership and courage with a bold finance package out of your committee. Thank you for your hard work, and thank you for the opportunity to speak here today.
Thank you, Norma. Questions? You're off the hook. Thank you.
Thank you.
Folks, we are at the 50-yard line, so take note. Ginny Kozlowski.
Good morning, Senator Fonfara, Representative Horn, members of the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee. My name is Ginny Kozlowski, and I serve as the Executive Director of the Connecticut Lodging Association. We represent hotels, motels, B&Bs, and inns across our state. I appreciate the opportunity to testify today in strong support of House Bill 7238, an act establishing a short-term rental registry and authorizing an optional municipal supplemental tax on short-term rentals. Connecticut's lodging industry consists of over 386 hotels, motels, B&Bs, and inns. All of these are required to register with the Department of Revenue Services, comply with Department of Labor regulation, and undergo a host of inspections, from fire safety to health and building codes. These requirements are just not bureaucratic hurdles. They are essential safeguards to ensure that guest safety, consumer protection, and tax compliance. Meanwhile, there are thousands of short-term rental properties across Connecticut without the same regulatory oversight, creating an uneven playing field that disadvantages licensed lodging establishments. Short-term rentals benefit from the same traveler demand, yet avoid many of the costs and responsibilities shouldered by our state's hotels and inns. HB 7238 seeks to level the playing field by requiring ST operators to register with the state, just as traditional lodging businesses do. A registry would enhance compliance with tax collection and remittance, ensuring that all lodging providers contribute fairly to the state and local revenues. Improve public safety by providing municipalities with visibility into STR locations. enabling proper inspections and enforcement of safety standards, protect consumers by ensuring STRs meet the same accountability and transparency expectation as hotels. This bill is not to eliminate short-term rentals, but rather to ensure fair competition and responsible operation within Connecticut's hospitality sector. Other states and municipalities have successfully implemented STR registries, and Connecticut should follow suit to ensure parity, public safety, and tax compliance. On behalf of the Connecticut Lodging Association and the businesses we represent, I urge the committee to support HB 7238, and thank you for your time, and I welcome your questions.
Representative Paletta.
Thank you so much for your testimony, and we certainly are on a fact-finding mission on this bill, and it's great to get that insight. Very briefly, my question surrounding other states: has it been successful? Has it worked? And what is your experience with what other states have done?
Recently, Rhode Island instituted a statewide register, and as you know, they're a smaller state than we are, and they have identified over 7,000 STRs. As was testified earlier, there is a disconnect in many communities about STRs and what role they play. New York City recently instituted a short-term registry and other guidance to protect neighborhoods and buildings. New Orleans is in the process of instituting a lottery to see who can have STRs because it was changing the character of their city. So there's been many attempts. At this point, there is not a national standard, but we think Connecticut can be a leader in that effort.
Chairperson Horn.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Following on the good ranking members question, we also have, I think it's around 11 municipalities in the state that have opted under we created a municipal option recently that allowed towns to create these registries. I wonder whether you have comments or experience about how that's working in those municipalities.
In New Haven, they have a registry for multifamily units, but I'm not familiar with any of the other short-term rental registries that have been instituted in any of the other municipalities. I know a number of municipalities have failed to enact. They didn't have the support of their residents. But as the Lodging Association, we get these calls from these towns that are trying to manage what is happening there. And until we have a standard that we all comply to, it's going to be disproportionate.
Representative Rader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hi, Janice. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well. Thank
I had
you.
a couple questions in working through this bill myself. And as Rep. Horn referred to, I think we have about 12 towns in Connecticut right now that took advantage of the opportunity to either change their ordinances or their zoning codes to kind of address STRs. Stonington seems to be the most rigid of them in terms, I don't want to conject that onto them, but they've created a very thorough process, even going as far as to create a permitting process for that property owner, and that permit can get revoked if there are certain numbers of infractions. But I wanted to ask you more about kind of the Airbnb, VRBO platforms and how that's impacting your industry. Because the way it works now, as I understand, and I can be corrected if I'm wrong, is that in all of the fees that VRBO takes in from that renter or that customer, they remit the taxes to the state. So the property owner doesn't even play into that or see that transaction. It's managed as part of their fee, I assume, to get remitted to the state. So if we were to create a registry, I would not want to see as represented by Airbnb, and their corporate identity. So how do you see that registry playing out in a practical form in terms of what the information that would be retained in that registry?
The information that would be retained in the registry would be the owner of the property, their local address of the property, if they're an out-of-state resident, where they currently reside or out of the country for that matter, and that they have a local representative within the state, that if there is an issue, you would have a person to reach out to. As for the remittance of the occupancy tax, Airbnb has been submitting to Department of Revenue Services since, I believe, 2016. And then in 2019, there was a statute passed that any short-term rental platform who does more than $250,000 has to remit the occupancy tax. But that's only one of the taxes that these short-term rental units should be being and submitting tax on. As the woman who testified earlier, the property that generated $175,000 in tax should be filing a Connecticut income tax return, whether they are a resident, a part-time resident, or a non-resident. So there's many tax streams that once we get a registry established and we can start to analyze where these people live, how much money is coming in, because they all get 1099-Ks, or they should be getting 1099-Ks, and how much income tax is owed to the state of Connecticut and where those nexuses are formed. I think it's an opportunity for the state of Connecticut to tap into much more revenue, because right now every hotel in the state of Connecticut collects occupancy tax. We collect sales tax on our meals and beverages that are served in our facilities. We collect tax if we're doing laundry or dry cleaning in our hotel. So I think what we're looking at, it's just broader than the occupancy tax, including sales tax and income tax. And it's an opportunity for the state of Connecticut.
Okay, and then my other only question is, so then if there was a municipal option in terms of creating a tax revenue stream of some sort, what do you think that should look like?
It needs to be, I think, a standardized rate of return. I was explaining to someone else earlier, if you're in the town of Branford and your supplemental tax is 3% and East Haven's is 2%, you might have people looking to start a short-term rental business in East Haven because it would be more competitive in terms of attracting guests because the tax rate is different. I think one of the things in Connecticut, we have the highest occupancy tax in the country at 15%. The question is, if you start to put in supplemental increases on short-term rental, would that put more people to choose to stay in hotels because tax rate is less? That was something that would need to be studied.
And I'll just make one comment. The VRBO and Airbnb platforms have become extraordinarily expensive, I think, for consumers as well. If sometimes you look at the rate per night and their fees, sometimes the fees are more than the rate per night. That's a separate issue, but I appreciate your input, especially around the local kind of opportunities for revenue stream, although we'll talk about that another time. But in terms of the registry, I do think it would be important to identify somebody in state, but I think that's going to be challenging because unless they have retained a property manager or other neighbors or whatever to create that, I'm just curious how that would play out, but we can talk about it.
Right. They can identify an agent that is within the state. As you were saying about VRBO and Airbnb, we are seeing an uptick of a number of corporate entities buying houses in general areas of the country and not only renting directly, but also managing those properties and taking a fee for that as well. So it's increasing the cost to the consumer, and that's always not as transparent as we would like to see.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Any other questions? Representative Shannon?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a quick question, and sorry if it's already been asked or answered. I just was wondering if your organization kept a kind of record for your members, if, there are short-term rental people, there are hotel,
So we don't have any, at this time, short-term rental members. We have hotels, inns, motels, B&Bs, and allied member, which are service providers to our industry.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Kozlowski, have you ever testified in front of this committee against the tax?
I may have testified against an increase in the occupancy tax when you went from 12 to 15%.
Yes. A little bit of irony here
There is
today.
some irony every day. But
I like that answer.
times have changed. And when you look at the number of short-term rentals that are possibly in the state of Connecticut and leveling that playing field so that we're all competing with one another at that same rate, I think we could be a little bit more flexible.
I prefer to go the other way and have none of you pay the tax, but that's just me. Compete on your
We
abilities.
collect the tax.
What's that?
We collect the tax.
I understand that. I'm saying that I'd rather there not be a tax on either of you and let you compete on
products.
making Connecticut a better place where everybody wants to come, but I'm just one person. Anyone else? Thank you.
Thank you.
Former Representative Alex Knopp.
Thank you, John, chairs and ranking members and members of the Finance Committee, which I had the pleasure to serve on for 15 years with my good friend John Fonfara. I'm here today to urge you to support Senate Bill 1528 concerning the tax study, but to amend it to include local property taxes as well. And I'd like to suggest 6 reasons why I think it's important to do so. First, property taxes in Connecticut represent 44% of all taxes paid in the state. So if you have a tax study and you exclude almost half of the taxes paid, there's really a question about its accuracy and relevance. Second, there have been so many changes since the last serious study was done of property taxes that I think we need to update the role of the property tax in Connecticut's fiscal structure. First, as you recall, in 2017, the state constitutional spending cap was amended to bring aid to distressed municipalities back under the cap where they had formerly been excluded. Then in 2017, also, the creation of the guardrails has made appropriations for statutory grants more challenging. Third, the guardrails make it easier to do tax relief through cutting taxes before revenue gets into the guardrail system. But the one system that connects property tax relief and the income tax cuts, the tax credit, has not been used as much and does not seem to be kind of appreciated. Fifth, we are about to experience, as we started in some towns, and I want to thank Representative Horn for her work last year to do the municipal option homestead exemption. We're seeing an extraordinary shift of the tax burden from the commercial sector to homeowners because of the post-pandemic changes in Connecticut and the region's economy. Simply that our private homes have appreciated in value tremendously, and the commercial properties have declined in value relative to homes. And therefore, there's been a big shift in the grand list of many municipalities from the commercial sector to the residential sector. And this means that even if municipal spending is held down, there will be still significant tax increases for homeowners caused by this shift. And the last reason I think it's important is we want to avoid
You've reached 3 minutes. You've reached 3 minutes. Please summarize.
last issue is we want to avoid tax shifting where we cut state taxes by shifting burdens to municipalities, which is what the feds are doing with Trump and Monk to shift from the federal system to the state system. So for these reasons, I'd urge you to include the property tax system in the study of state taxes in this bill. Appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us.
We seem to have lost.
I got it back, John, there. Thank you.
There you are. Always good to see you, Alex.
Thank you, John. I want to thank you for your leadership over these many years in support of property tax concerns. We rely on you for that perspective. And again, thank Representative Horn for her work last year on the homestead exemption.
Thank you, sir. Representative Farrar.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Alex, for being here and for your testimony. And
Sure.
I did want to just follow up on your focus on the need for greater analysis of our property tax impact. And I appreciate you highlighting that because in our efforts here in the legislature in further establishing greater detail to our tax incidence study, it seems there's been difficulty in capturing the property tax data information. And I was curious from your perspective, since you're highlighting the property tax piece of this, if there was any other recommendations you might have for inclusion to improve that tax incidence study.
I appreciate the question. I did not come prepared today to give a well-defined answer, but I'll certainly send you something offline, and I appreciate your interest in making the study as important. I think one of the things that needs to be done is to have the study be done on a regular basis. We went for 20 years or so without a study, and I think now we've had two in short succession, and I think continuing that would be important. And I'll get you some suggestions, and I appreciate the question.
Thank you, Alex. That would be helpful because I think, you know, in tasking DRS to keep improving our tax incidence study and for us to be able to make sure we're fulfilling that, I think we want to make sure that we understand what the continual difficulties are to accessing this property tax data so that we really can have a good picture of what our residents are truly paying. And I would, as you said, appreciate any other recommendations you might have in looking at that report. So thank you for that consideration.
Sure. Thank you for the question. And I'd also urge the attention of this committee on the tax gap study that DRS recently issued, showing an enormous amount of uncollected taxes. I know there's been a lot of testimony today about increasing tax rates or expanding revenue options. Certainly one of the most important of those is to collect the uncollected taxes that are due now. And I think that study has some very important issues for this committee to consider.
Thank you, Alex, for highlighting that. And I agree if there are certain recommendations you have for us to dig deeper at as to how we can fulfill the recommendations of the Department of Revenue Services to close that tax gap, we welcome them as well. So thanks for your attention to that and welcome your further thoughts as a committee. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Other questions for the former mayor of Norwalk? Seeing none. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you, John.
Nate?
Good morning. Thank you for having me on. Chairperson Sponfera, Horn, Ranking Members Fazio and Paletta, distinguished members of the Finance, Revenue and Bonding Committee. Appreciate the opportunity to be here today and going to echo some of the comments you heard earlier in strong support of HB 7239. My name is Nate Quinnell. I'm the head of school here at Norwich Free Academy in Norwich, Connecticut. Norwich Free Academy is unique as one of Connecticut's endowed academies, serving 9 students from 9 sending towns that come to us as their high school. Like all schools, we're committed to providing a safe, modern, well-maintained learning environment. And as you heard earlier, however, maintaining and upgrading our facilities is a constant challenge, particularly when it comes to securing funding for necessary capital improvements. Projects such as, I think, kind of thinking this through, currently one of the main funding avenues for minor capital repairs is the DAS non-priority list. This is a great program from the state, and while funding from here can be helpful, it's also extremely limited in what can be used for in terms of project mix. This limited nature of the process makes it difficult for schools like ours to efficiently access the resources needed to complete necessary repairs and upgrades. These projects kind of fall into that area: too small to bond, too small to move to referendum, but too large to capture in your annual budget. Projects such as replacing aging boilers, repairing parking lots, maintaining athletic fields like turf field are essential in ensuring students have a safe, functional space for learning, extracurricular activities, and community engagement. Yet under the current system, securing funding for these type of repairs is very difficult to obtain. The DRIP program provides a more accessible and reliable source of funding for these critical infrastructure needs. By providing districts with flexibility to address their most pressing maintenance challenges, this program would allow schools to be more proactive in their facility upkeep rather than constantly playing catch up. A well-maintained school is more than just a building. It's a place where students develop, grow, and prepare for the future. We must ensure all students, regardless of where they go to school, have access to safe, high-quality facilities that support both academic achievement and extracurricular engagement. I urge the committee to support Bill 7239 and provide the funding schools need to address critical maintenance projects efficiently. Thank you for your time and consideration. I appreciate your support with this important legislation.
Question for Mr. Quinnell? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Paul Britton?
Good afternoon. Chairpersons Fonfara and Horn, ranking members Fazio and Paletta, and distinguished members of the Finance Review and Bonding Committee. Like so many of my colleagues before, I appreciate the opportunity to speak in strong support of House Bill 7239, an act establishing public school district repair and improvement project program. My name is Paul Brenton. For the last 4 years, I've been the superintendent of schools here in Plainfield, Connecticut. This is my 4th year in this role and my 27th year in education. Like many of my colleagues before, I'd like to speak about how important proactive investment in upkeep is for our schools and how investing now will ultimately save us money in the future. We need more bills like this. In Plainfield, we welcome almost 2,000 students into our 5 schools each day. Maintaining our school buildings so they remain safe, functional, and supportive of learning for small rural communities in Connecticut's a constant challenge. It's one that's only made harder by the absence of dedicated state funding. Every day here in Plainfield, we make decisions that rely on our local budget to cover maintenance costs. When local budgets are tough, necessary repairs are often delayed, which leads to more significant and expensive issues down the line. Last night, I had the opportunity to watch my UConn Huskies. When they fell behind as part of a 14-3 run, I asked myself the question, can they come back? Ultimately, my valiant Huskies did not come back against those dreaded Florida Gators. And I don't want our schools to be in this situation. House Bill 7239 provides a practical and much needed solution to this issue. By establishing a stable funding source for routine school maintenance, this initiative would allow us to enable districts to be proactive, to address facilities issues before they become major problems. We wouldn't have had an issue yesterday if we could guard on the perimeter and box out in the paint. Unfortunately, we fell behind. I'm urging the committee to support House Bill 7239 to help districts like Plainfield gain access to the essential funding for school maintenance and to make this proactive investment and upkeep now that will save money in the long run and ensure that our students have the learning communities they deserve. My grandfather was the head of a town council. He was also mayor of his small town. He used to say often in public meetings, we pay now or we pay later. I'm asking the chairpersons, the ranking members, and distinguished members of the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee to support House Bill 7239. We didn't get a win with the Huskies last night, but give us a win with this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. And as you know, we have a lot of Huskies fans on the Finance Committee, so that definitely perked everybody up. So we appreciate that. Seeing no questions, thanks for being with us.
Thank you. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you. Next up, we have Alan Miller. No. Nick Albini.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Chairpersons Fonfara and Horn, ranking members Fazio and Paletta, and distinguished members of the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee. Thank you so much for this opportunity to provide testimony and strong support of HB 7239. My name is Nicholas Albini, and I serve as the Chief Operating Officer for Waterbury Public Schools. As one of Connecticut's largest school districts serving a high-need student population, our operational needs and demands are significant and constant. With dozens of buildings, thousands of students, and aging infrastructure across our facilities portfolio, our team is tasked with keeping schools safe, functional, and responsive to the evolving needs of education. That responsibility is made more difficult by the lack of consistent funding for small and mid-scale capital improvements. While the state offers support for major construction projects, there is currently no direct, reliable mechanism for funding the types of minor repairs and upgrades that make up the majority of our facilities' work. Things like mechanical system replacements, classroom reconfigurations, restroom renovations, and site improvements. For districts like Waterbury, where financial flexibility is limited and the demand is high, these projects often get delayed, not because they aren't important, but because there's no viable path to fund them. DRIP would change that. By creating a dedicated stream of funding for minor capital improvements, this program would allow us to address issues in a timely, cost-effective way before they grow into larger, more extensive problems. Last year, we scheduled several aesthetic and functional projects throughout our 33 schools. An electrical transformer fire, which was not covered by insurance, cost us $193,000 to repair for the start of school. We needed to hire an electrical contractor to design the upgrade to present electrical code requirements. This was a devastating cost that forced us to remove planned projects that impacted our indoor air quality improvement efforts. This year, we received notice that a pool deck in one of our high schools is deteriorating. We need to employ the services of a structural engineer to design proper support to the deck. This will surely surpass the cost of the electrical transformer from last year. These are only two examples of the challenges that school districts face on a continual basis. The District Repair and Improvement Program responds to issues that plagued us the last 2 years. We have schools in excess of 100 years old, 14 elementary schools with no central ventilation systems, 6 elementary schools that are still not ADA compliant because they do not have elevators. We are still addressing lead paint and asbestos in schools that need to be remediated. Students and staff spend a great amount of their learning and teaching hours in schools, and they deserve to learn and teach in a safe and enjoyable environment. This program would not only ease pressure on our local budgets, but also allow operational teams like ours to plan more strategically, prioritize critical needs, and ensure our schools remain safe and functional and supportive of student learning. On behalf of Waterbury Public Schools, I urge the committee to support HB 7239, and I thank you for your time and continued support and commitment to Connecticut students. I would be glad to take any questions.
Thank you. Questions from the committee? Vice Chair, Representative Constantine.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you so much, Superintendent. You outlined some of the great need that you have in your district. I know the DRIP report, it's just kind of an estimate regarding how the funds could be distributed. How long would it take you to address the major issues in your community, in your schools?
Okay. First of all, Chief Operating Officer.
Oh, sorry.
So am I. So some of the larger projects like the ventilation systems, we had put out an ESSER RFP in some of the schools, and what we had available for ESSER funds, the bids that came in far overshadowed the available money, so we had to put them on hold. So for funds like this, we would tackle the mid-level obligations that we need. We haven't even talked about athletic fields. We have 3 high schools that can't even be used for baseball, softball, football. So the point that we can roll over our funds from year to year and build up our funds so that we can tackle a high school at a time is really enticing to have that, instead of getting to the end of the year and then you're spending money that you don't want to spend, you want to save. So this allows us to do that. We are going to do more DAS applications, non-priority applications for our HVAC systems. But again, we have to come up with 25% of our matching funds. That's what becomes very difficult.
I mean, as you know, someone so involved with the schools for 20 years, children in the schools, I know how important sports are to kids in their development, in their teamwork, just in their general mental health well-being. With athletic fields that need such help, you know, how extensive is your current program? And what's, you know, I assume that, you know, not being able to attend to the athletic fields is affecting curriculum and extracurricular.
So what we're forced to do at this time is bus students to a different city park municipal stadium, another school that may have the facilities and there's no game or practice going on. So it does become a logistics issue, but because we have to do some irrigation, site work, and then what do we want to do? Do we want lights? Do we want a new press box, parking, lights? So those are some of the big cap items, but we certainly want to get the air quality improved in the elementary schools, and that's 14 of them. We did do quite a few with our ESSER funds, but now that created another $100,000 to $200,000 bill a year just for the filters for those schools. So while that was good, it created another expense, and our unallocated funds is getting smaller and smaller.
And one last question, you mentioned 14 elementary school locations. How many total schools are you looking at in your area?
We have 33.
33, thank you. Thank you so much, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Seeing no other questions, thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much for your time.
Next up, we have Jess Corbett.
Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Oh, great. Dear co-chairs, Senator Fonfara, Representative Horn, and Vice Chairs, Senator Cabrera, Senator Miller, Representative Constantine, and distinguished members of the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee. My name is Jess Corbett, and I'm president of the Western Connecticut Area Labor Federation and an organizer for New Haven Rising. I'm also a resident of New Haven. I'm here to testify in favor of HB 7238, an act establishing a state short-term rental registry and authorizing an optional municipal supplement tax on short-term rentals with an amendment. Fighting for affordable housing is a core component of New Haven Rising's organizing program. New Haven is suffering from an affordable housing crisis. Any housing unit that is used exclusively as a short-term rental is a unit that cannot be used as a unit for long-term housing. Right now, our city does not have enough units. In 2024, it was reported that New Haven had a historically low vacancy rate of 3%. The dramatic increase in rents is pushing out long-term residents who can no longer afford to live here. We welcome additional ways to regulate short-term rentals. However, any regulations from the state should be the floor rather than the ceiling in addressing short-term rentals. Different cities will need to devise different solutions to address the unique housing and revenue challenges in their city. From this perspective, I would like to see an amendment that clarifies that cities will be empowered to create their own registries of short-term rentals. Thank you for your time. I'm available to answer questions.
Thank you. And thank you for noting, I think one of the things about creating this registry is that the issue of short-term rentals affects different municipalities differently. And for some, as you suggest, it's about housing. For others, it's about quality of life or the hospitality industry. So it varies. We did pass legislation in the last couple of years that gave municipalities the option to create a registry on their own. However, so we are, and I will speak only for myself here, but trying to tailor our legislation to work with that so that we don't duplicate what municipalities are doing or force people to report twice. So I wonder whether you, are you suggesting changes to that municipal option legislation that we passed or?
No, just would want to make sure that that's great that municipalities have that right. Just want to make sure that this doesn't supersede what municipalities could do on top of what's being laid out in this House bill.
Thank you. Any other questions? Being none, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Zulfi Jaffrey. No. Jack Fazzino, State Representative Jack Fazzino. Welcome. Glad to have you in the Finance Committee.
Good afternoon, esteemed members of the Finance Committee, Representative Horn, Senator Fonfara, Senator Fazio, Representative Paletta, and Representative Rader. Thanks for having me. I'm here to testify on behalf of House Bill 7238 in strong support of this proposition, which would create a registry for short-term rentals and authorizing a supplemental municipal taxation on such properties. My support for this bill comes on the heels of a pretty outrageous situation in my own district. And if you want to look into my written testimony, it lays out the facts of it. But for about 5 years, there was this property on a lakefront in one of the quietest parts of Berlin that has operated as an unregistered short-term rental property. It's listed on Vrbo and on Airbnb. And every summer, 2-3 times a summer, they would invite quite literally thousands of people, advertising parties across the state. And it would be a logistical nightmare for our police department, for our zoning officials, and most importantly, for the neighbors in that very quiet part of town. And this came up when I was on the town council in Berlin. And every time they would have a party and there would be a police presence, it was always, well, we'll get law enforcement involved, we'll get state authorities involved if necessary, but there's only so much we as a municipality can do. And so that was a recurring theme for several years until this all came to a head in 2023. And if you Google Westport Aston Martin Berlin Chop Shop, you will see this property come up as a part of that search. And I guess there, for a time, this same property was operating as a depository for stolen motor vehicles throughout the state. And so this is a very extreme example, but I think it underscores the need for better oversight throughout the STR industry. And I don't think we want to discourage our tourism industry by any stretch of the imagination, but you could imagine the logistical challenges that come with unregistered, unmarked short-term rentals. And Berlin provides, I think, the chief in case example of that. And so I think this, on the supplemental tax side of things, I think that is a very flexible, very even-handed way to address some of the external costs associated with maintaining these properties as well. And I think this proposal strikes the right balance between supporting tourism throughout our state and while also assisting municipalities in addressing some of the unanticipated consequences that can come with these rentals. So with that, I yield the rest of my time, and I'm happy to answer any further questions from the committee.
Thank you. And I'm glad, I mean, your example provides, along with the prior speaker who talked about housing, another reason why, you know, these properties can cause concern for residents. And I think one of the things that we're trying to balance here as well is, you know, some municipalities have a better ability to deal with this than others. But there are other smaller communities that are just as affected by the issue. And so trying to strike the balance of giving authority to the municipalities to deal with this while providing them with the information and some sort of systems that the state can provide is the balance we're trying to strike. And I wonder whether in terms of the town, you know, towns, given that I represent 9, I'm always assuming everybody represents multiple. The balance of what the kinds of authority the municipalities don't have in your experience or would like to have in order to regulate this better.
I think the biggest challenge with this respected property is that the owners were in Florida. And so I think just even at the outset with this registry, knowing who the owners and the operators of the property are and having that repository of information with the state is one thing, because coordinating any sort of response with the property owners was exceptionally challenging. Not having their contact information, trying to parse through whatever public records we could to track them down. I just think this is a great start for providing oversight within this particular market. And to your point, Representative Horn, about every community is a little different. I completely agree. And that's why I think that a flexible policy is exceptionally important here. I would imagine that shoreline towns like Old Saybrook, as an example, have a much bigger proportion of short-term rental properties. That's an important part of their economy. Leave it to the towns to decide what their own individual needs are and to look at their specific market and determine, hey, you know, what tax rate should we assess on our short-term rentals throughout our municipality. Everyone's going to track that a little differently.
Thank you. Senator Fazio.
Thank you, Representative. Whenever I see your name, I think to myself, we're only 2 letters away from being related. I appreciate the testimony because you're providing a real world example, you know, and it's interesting because I'm in a shoreline town, but it seems like in the Fairfield County area, there hasn't been much concern about this, as you say, the eastern shoreline. You know, I'm wondering whether, I think the example you gave, I find it useful because it feels like an example like that can be dealt with under existing town powers, police powers, other sort of quality of life powers that a municipality has, rather than a more broad authority like taxing authority or a very broad, you know, registry requirement that will penalize the good actors, which is the vast majority of actors in this space who want to supplement their incomes. You know, you think of, you know, it alleviates the real estate market because it allows other real estate to be used for housing, and so on and so forth. You know, I'm wondering whether you think existing policing other powers to regulate quality of life from the municipalities can't deal with the precise situation or other situations like you referenced.
Senator Fazio, that's a great question. I'll say that I wore my thick frame glasses just to create additional confusion around the two of us. So I think coming from my own individual perspective, being a town councilor in Berlin at the time, 20,000 people in town. We have a police force of about 40 to 45 officers, depending on hiring at the time. And I just, in my own experience at the local level, I think it's a tremendous challenge. It's a really heavy lift, not only just addressing the heat of the moment, so to speak, right? Where you have 1,000 people at 3 a.m. drinking and doing whatever else, and oftentimes driving, and getting all of those cars out of the neighborhood. It was a huge lift for our police department, and a police department that's already stretched very thin because of all the hats that they wear. And so I don't see it as necessarily a, you know, posing a challenge to that ability to adequately police. I think in my experience, there are limitations, especially for small towns, as to how effectively you can address it in the moment, but also coordinate maybe a more holistic and comprehensive response at the state level. Because I think in this instance specifically, and I think this is about as bad of an instance as you could have. But it was shown, you know, 2 years after the fact that you had illegal activity happening in this property. There were difficulties getting in touch with this out-of-state owner and holding that out-of-state owner responsible. I think that in this particular instance, more help from a more centralized authority like the state would be helpful. But I do agree that laying the hammer down on every municipality that is following the rules, or every Airbnb owner that's following the rules, is too heavy-handed. And so I think that this approach kind of gets at both. It provides support for a more coordinated response and better oversight at the outset, while also ensuring that you're not unduly burdening the good actors.
All right. Well, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you,
Madam
question.
Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Rader.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hi, Rep. Tiziano, good to see you. I appreciate your testimony. I was just reading through it, and that's such a unique situation, but really emblematic about what can happen when just one bad actor comes into a community for these STRs. I had 2 questions for you. One is around the state registry. And one of the things we've been hearing and through testimony is in East Haven, in your case, is these out-of-state owners that really, it's just an investment and they kind of hands off, really don't care what happens. And in terms of the registry, you know, it's nice to have the owner's information, the phone number, proof of insurance, all of that. But one of the things I keep coming back to is some sort of in-state representative tied to that property. Do you agree with that? How do you, if you do, how do you see that playing out? Is it a realtor? Is it a property manager? But that's my issue, is that it's great to have that information. But if you call the guy in Florida and he's not answering his phone and you're dealing with something locally, is there an opportunity to have an identified person in state, and would that be possible?
I think that that makes a lot of sense, especially considering my experience with this particular situation. Condo associations do this too, right? Where it's very difficult to manage a lot of these property management type issues firsthand or in-house. And maybe that's too burdensome for the one-off owner who lives in, let's say, Colorado, and is just having this property as an investment property. I'd like to see that. I think that that would be helpful as far as coordinating with a real person in the event that something does go wrong. I think that I'd have to reread the statute, or the bill, excuse me. But I think it allows for not just owner contact information, but also operator contact information, which I think would be a broad enough sort of encompassing to make sure that there's at least some real person you can get in contact to troubleshoot. But I agree. I think that that's a good aspect of it.
Great. And then my second question is around kind of the municipal option. And, you know, in some cases, like Stonington has created a very regimented process for how they set up their own registry. They have a permit process. You can have the permit revoked. And in some cases, fees are levied. Do you think, again, we're giving the municipalities the option for this, but I keep thinking about enforcement. And what does that look like? And do you have any opinion on a fee structure around that at all?
I would love to take a look at what Stonington has on the books, especially if there are towns that have a more robust STR market. What works in those instances, but even just, you know, I'm putting on my municipal attorney hat on, like that is the go-to for any time you are adopting a new ordinance or a charter revision. You look to see where has it really effectively worked. And I think for a market that is probably pretty busy, like Stonington is, you have not just the Connecticut beach traffic, but also the Rhode Island beach traffic too. I would like to look and see what they have in place. And I think that if it's a good framework, town should be encouraged to go off of it.
I agree. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Representative
Madam
Rader.
Chair.
Thank you, Representative. Seeing no further questions for you, I'm sure you, like many of us, are juggling many things today. So thanks for joining us. Next up, we have Joshua Pavelik.
Hi, good afternoon, Representative Horn. I can't tell if Senator Fonfara is there, but either way, distinguished members of the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee, my name is Josh Pollock. I'm a Glastonbury resident. I serve as the minister at the Unitarian Universalist Society East in Manchester, and I'm a leader with Connecticut for All. Thank you for this opportunity to testify today in support of SB 1528, an act concerning a study of state taxation, as well as to speak more broadly about the need for a bold finance and tax package from your committee this year. I support the concept behind SB 1528 to study certain taxes imposed by Connecticut. I'm concerned that the reason cited for such a study, developing the economic competitiveness of the state, misses the mark. Along with other Connecticut for All leaders, I propose expanding SB 1528 to study how our tax structure can more effectively support the full funding of essential public goods and services and reduce economic inequality among our residents. Furthermore, given that the state's wealthiest residents are benefiting and will continue to benefit enormously from federal tax cuts, I also think it is critical, in the very least, to study how the state might generate more revenue from these residents to make up for likely reductions in federal spending. Economic competitiveness matters and is certainly worth studying, but let's not forget how unfair our tax system is for working people who pay a far greater percentage of their income in taxes than the state's wealthiest citizens. Can the study proposed in SB 1528 address that fact? Can this study prioritize economic competitiveness for working people? I hope it can. I also want to take a moment to speak more broadly in favor of your committee putting forth a bold and transformative finance and tax package as part of this session's budget conversations. With federal tax and spending cuts looming, Connecticut cannot continue with business as usual. First, we need to reform the fiscal guardrails. They are over-functioning, placing too much money beyond the reach of the legislature and the governor and making it impossible for the state to make necessary investments in public goods and services. Second, we need progressive tax reform. Connecticut for All and others have been advocating for new sources of revenue for years. We've talked about the mansion tax, expanding capital gains taxes, closing the carry to interest loophole, instituting the digital ad tax, increasing the income tax on the top tier, which Connecticut can do and maintain competitiveness with surrounding states, and much more. It's time to take these proposals seriously. You all have the opportunity to fix the guardrails and to fight for new revenue sources. I urge you to take that opportunity. Thank you for your time. Thank you for this opportunity to speak.
Thank you, and thank you for bringing a minister's cadence to your testimony.
You're welcome.
Seeing no questions, thanks for being with us.
Thanks. Good to see you all.
Next up is State Representative Kara Rochelle. No, Stacy Zimmerman.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having us here to testify today. My name is Stacy Zimmerman, and I'm here with the Service Employees International Union, Connecticut State Council, Chairperson Fanfara and Horn, and members of the Finance and Revenue and Bonding Committee. SEIU represents about 70,000 people in Connecticut, both in the public and private sector. And we support SB 1528 and HB 7237. You know, I may be one of the weird people out here, but I kind of get excited when we do tax studies. So I'm really excited we're going to be doing a little more. While we're looking at these taxes, and spending, we really think that we have to look at the budget holistically this year in a way that we haven't before. We're facing a situation that we may not be able to comprehend coming down from the federal government in around October. And we're going to have to place ourselves to pick up some of the slack that we're used to the federal government doing. We may have to go it alone, which is a scary sight, but luckily Connecticut is one of the wealthiest states in the nation, and we have people who I think can afford to give a little more. So as you put together your package and you study these taxes, please take a look at what we can ask those that can afford to give to the services that we need to make sure that we are and continue to be a state that really honors diversity, honors the ability for folks to move up the food chain and of the economic ladder, and gives them the opportunity to move forward throughout their life. So I'll cut it there and let you guys maybe move on to, the end of this committee hearing. But thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. You stuck around till near the end of the meeting, so thanks for being with us. Seeing no questions, enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
All right. Thank you.
Next, we have John O'Connor.
Okay, good afternoon, Senator Fanfara, Representative Horn, and all the members of the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee. My name is John O'Connor. I teach at Central Connecticut State University, and I'm one of the leaders of the faculty union CSU-AUP. We represent faculty in the 4 state regional universities. My union is a proud member of Connecticut, the Connecticut for All Coalition. I would like to thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of SB 1528, a bill that would study taxation in our state. And hopefully this bill would allow us to consider some of the inequities in our tax structure. On January 14th of this year, Connecticut for All presented its equity agenda. The equity agenda was an appeal to the governor, OPM, and even this committee to adopt a budget that works for all the people of Connecticut. That is a budget that increases ECS funding for K through 12 students, a budget that ensures that healthcare workers have a living wage, and a budget that provides unemployment benefits for striking workers. Connecticut for All estimated that our state needed in excess of $2.6 billion in total funding to meet Connecticut's unmet need. We need more revenue to meet that need. Now is the time to both adjust our fiscal guardrails and make a bold move with regard to our tax system. Trump and his cronies are pushing a double agenda of authoritarianism and austerity. We all know the score. Tax cuts for the rich, tariffs that punish, an attack on reproductive rights, a cruel attack on immigrants, an ugly denial of transgender rights, and a hollowing out of our democracy. In the face of this authoritarianism and austerity, our state needs to prepare for any loss of federal government funding. This committee has already heard about a number of potential tax changes that would prepare our state for whatever emerges out of Washington. Those taxes include a capital gains surtax, which potentially could raise revenues by $650 to $400 million. Other possibilities included Senator Looney's mansion tax, but also an increase in income tax on the top tier of wage earners and an increase in corporate taxation. A strong Connecticut has an economy that works for everyone. SB 1528 would help us consider how our tax structure can more effectively fund social services, reduce inequality among our residents, and prepare for whatever the federal government decides to do. When we put our neighbors first, we all win. We need to use tax policy to change our state for the better. Given the chaos in Washington, D.C., we may have no other choice. Thank you for your time and for all the hard work that you do.
And thank you for joining us today. Seeing no questions for you, enjoy the rest of your day. Next up, we have Mary Wick.
Good afternoon, Senator Fonfara, Representative Horn, Vice Chairs and distinguished members of the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee. I'm here to express strong support for Bill number 7238, which would establish a short-term rental registry and authorize municipalities to impose optional supplemental tax on short-term rentals. I am, along with my husband, I own the Westbrook Inn and the Captain Standard Inn, 2 small bed and breakfasts in Westbrook, Connecticut. I also serve as president of the Connecticut Lodging Association. You heard from Ginny Kozlowski already today, so I'll talk about what it means to us as small business owners to have this registry in place. Significantly, it would level the playing field for the lodging business, large and small. It would provide transparency, tax compliance, and consumer safety. We heard how there are instances where short-term rentals can be abused and create issues within communities. This bill targets specifically short-term rentals, which are not even rentals that are monthly, but just nightly and weekly, operating really as commercial businesses, oftentimes within residential zones. Public is often confused between bed and breakfasts and Airbnbs, believing they're the same. What I'm subject to just for my 2 small businesses is registering my business annually. That requires hotel as well as food and beverage licenses. We get inspected not only by the health department, but also by fire. And we are required to live on premise and have someone on premise for safety purposes at all times. You can go on to some of these short-term registries and you could see that there are homes that are available with advertising occupancy much greater than we are legally allowed. And that doesn't have any oversight. Not only do we pay occupancy tax, sales and use, and food tax, as Ginny mentioned, but we employ staff. So we also pay payroll taxes and contribute to our communities by having our local residents work. All of this is for the well-being of the traveling guest. And while I can say that sometimes I stay at short-term rentals when I travel, the goal would be to have this registry so we are just aware of what properties within our state and municipalities are operating really as strictly commercial rentals. This would not impact any monthly rentals, or even when folks have summer properties and then rent them academically, this doesn't necessarily address those. These rentals range nightly
Please summarize.
from 150 to over $1,000 a night. So the small amount that a registry would require of them, but also generate, could potentially be used towards tourism, which I would love to see that be increased. So I would urge you to please consider this this bill and support it. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Thanks for being with us. Any questions? Seeing none, enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks for.
Thank
putting
you.
on. Next, and I believe last, is Mike Cummings.
Good afternoon. My name is Mike Cummings. I'm the superintendent of Pomfret Community School in Pomfret, Connecticut. I'm very well aware that I am last on the list, so I will not reinforce everything else that my colleagues have already stated, but I am here to support House Bill 7239, the act creatively that establishes the creatively named DRIP program. Just really briefly, in Pomfret, we are very fortunate that our town government supports and has supported for a number of years about $40,000 on the capital side to support small projects that are needed at Pomfret Community School. Pomfret Community School is not only a pre-K-8 building, the only building in the Pomfret community, but is also essentially the community center for many recreation activities as well. And the town, like I said, has been very supportive of us. But like everybody else, that money never goes far enough. Not only would this bill help us plan for future needs, but it would also accommodate the unexpected, as you can see in my testimony about the drains that we had just recently discovered a couple weeks ago. So with that said, I just cannot emphasize enough the support that is needed. I thank you for the opportunity, and if there's any questions, I'm here to answer them.
Thank you. When you are the last at only 1:30 in the middle of the day, we call you the closer, which is actually a powerful place to be. Any questions for Mr. Cummings? Seeing none, thank you again for.
Thank you. Take care.
And our administrators, or anyone who we missed earlier who is with us now? State Representative Kara Rochelle just under the wire. We were just about to adjourn. Floor is yours.
Good afternoon to my colleagues. Chair Horn and the rest of the members of the committee. I'll make this brief. I just wanted to come today to testify in favor of HB 7238, an act establishing a state short-term rental registry and authorizing an optional municipal supplemental tax on short-term rentals. I put a similar bill in this year and think it is so incredibly important that we are taking this step. It is often an unrecognized piece of the puzzle when it comes to the housing crisis in the state of Connecticut. And the reality is that over the past several years, due to apps like Airbnb and Vrbo and others, you're seeing an incredible amount of units that are being taken off from long-term rental and used solely for short-term rental. In major areas, major cities, this can be as much as 10 to 15% of rentals. And we have the data on that. I've got a great report from Journal of Urban Economics for anyone's interested in some light reading. And I brought this along because there is data that shows that when you start to regulate these units, in some cases, depending on the type of regulation that you put in place, it can decrease short-term rentals by as much as 50% and can actually start to lower rents again, which is so important. This is not to penalize anyone that's using short-term rentals. The reality is that this is a business, and if people are going to use this model, then we need to have some type of regulation in place. We're seeing many reports, I'm sure you've heard some today, of when you have these short-term rentals, you have people who are only there for a few days or for a week. They're a little bit louder. They're maybe tourists, and they just treat the neighborhood differently. And this morning on my way in, I did a quick search on my own community and found that I had 10 Airbnb locations that were within half a mile or less from my house in a residential area in Ansonia, Connecticut. So this is taking real units offline in real neighborhoods at a time when we have the lowest vacancy rate in the country. It's important that we get this under control, that we know exactly who is renting these out, and that we have some type of recourse in this matter. One thing I do want to put in on the record, though, is I do hope that there is consideration of who we, when we do these registration fees, it is my hope that we will direct some of that funding back to community action agencies They are the agencies that are really on the front lines of handling the housing crisis. We want to make sure that some of this money goes back, not just to the towns who already have a supplemental option, but also to these organizations that are doing the real work to keep people in their homes if they're in jeopardy of being evicted, and also getting people rehoused if they fall victim to the housing crisis.
Thank you, Representative. I have a quick question, but you mentioned data just now about something that caused a reduction in short-term rentals. Was that regulation, or was that just creating a registry?
So it's not just a registry. There's an entire toolbox of options that can be done. This is a study from the Journal of Urban Economics from 2021. I actually have an NCSL report I'm happy to share with you as well that goes through what each state is doing. We have regulations that are on the books in New York, Arizona, California, Colorado, Maine, Massachusetts, Montana, Vermont, Wisconsin, Washington, D.C., and as of last year, pending in Rhode Island and Washington State. And so it varies. It can be anything from a registry, which is a starting point, to caps on how many days out of the year somebody can be using them in this fashion, additional fees, treating it almost like a hotel, and having some additional fees and regulations in place for the businesses, because it is a business. I'm happy to share this report with you as well that we have with record.
Sure. And any material you have, please share with our clerk.
Absolutely happy to pass it along as
Representative
well.
Winter.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks for your testimony. We heard some testimony earlier today about a desire for a primary residence requirement, that you'd only be able to have a short-term rental if you were the primary resident. Do you have thoughts on whether municipalities should have an option to impose a requirement like that?
So I can speak to, I think that there's a big difference between somebody that is renting out their primary residence as an Airbnb and somebody that is owns a property, for example, say they own the multifamily they live in and also a multifamily offsite. And if you are renting out the personal space that you live in, then clearly there's no displacement on units being lost for long-term rental. But if you start saying, no, I'm not going to rent out these additional apartments that I have that I could be renting out for long-term use, then it is, I would argue that that is the point where there should be additional fees and charges. Not if you're renting out your own space or staying with a neighbor, or even if it's an owner-occupied building, but if you have a second location, if you have a larger facility, so not the two families, but anything beyond that, or maybe we look at a tiered system where if it's the second apartment and a two-family, but then beyond that, you're taking apartments online that should be used for long-term use, and you're treating it as a business in a different sense. And so I think we need to look at it in a different sense as far as how we tax it.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Seeing no further questions for you.
Thank you for your
Congratulations
time.
on making it, and now you are our closer.
And I will put this all on the record for you.
Great, thank you. And there's nobody else that we've missed. We are getting the thumbs up. Okay, we will stay tuned to your email for the announcement of the next exciting meeting of the Finance Revenue and Bonding Committee. With that, we are adjourned. Thank you.